we go to the second panelist, which is Usman Hamid, the director of Amnesty International. Please, Usman Hamid, we have one question for you to explore. Our question is, to what extent is racism and nationalism in Indonesia connected? And how is this connected to the anti-racist uprising last year from your perspective? Please, Mr. Usman Hamid.
Well, thank you, Rosa. That's two questions, not one. I'm not sure I can do better than reference Benny G.I., but let me first express my gratitude to all of you, to Jason, to Pak Jacob, to reference Benny, to Rosa, and also to Sarah from Black Lives Matter. I will try to do my best to answer the question. First of all, let me first explain what constitutes racism. So racism comes from the way people feel superior over the other people. And the driving force behind racism could be economic interests, under colonial power, under slavery system, or under imperialism and authoritarianism. And I think reference Benny has mentioned earlier, the research done by Indonesian Institute of Science, LIPI, that one of the sources of conflicts between Papua and Jakarta is discrimination, racial discrimination, as well as systematic marginalizations of West Papuans. So the way they do it is from a human rights point of view, is through the forms of any distinction, exclusion based on race, color, distance, or national or ethnic origin, which has the purpose of nullifying or impairing the recognitions of human rights, either political, economic, social, cultural, or any other field of public lives. And secondly, in Indonesia, I think this racism itself is not only defined in a way that I mentioned earlier, but also not only racial discrimination, but also xenophobia and discrimination based on color. And in Indonesia, nationalism has been contested idea throughout the history. Before we become independent, nationalism is a very powerful idiom to unite the people for the purpose of liberation, to fight against injustice, discrimination, etc. And people here are aware that Indonesia is made of multiple ethnicity, races, and also religion. However, when it comes to politics today, for example, politicians have what I called, to be what I called too rigid, too fixated in seeing Papua from an ideological point of view. In other words, nationalist idioms have been narrowly understood in a way that those power holders, those politicians, may give us a pretext or an excuse to justify human rights violations against Papuan. And nationalism in that narrow definition has been dominated by politicians who have economic interests, who have rigidity in looking at what's behind political expression. So, I'm sure you know what people here called NKRI harga mati. The unitary state of the Republic of Indonesia is undisputed. It's a dead price, quote unquote. So when we talk about the case of West Papua, where Reverend Benny has mentioned the nationalism in Papua as well, we will find what I call the class of nationalism between West Papuan nationalists and also Indonesian nationalists. So Papuan express its nationalism by raising their Morning Star flag, by expressing their grievances, human rights violation, injustice, including historical injustice. But this is what Jakarta called, something similar to ideological transgression. So for Indonesian elite, for example, or Indonesian nationalists, the states made it clear that this kind of ideological transgression, like promotion of For example, propaganda for separation or propaganda of separation for any Indonesian territory, or any expression that are considered to be non-mainstream narratives would attract either legal proceedings or intimidation by effective group. And this is getting worse when we have, weak rule of law. So one of the most serious flaws of post-Suharto democracy has been this continuously weak rule of law. So riddled by corruption, mismanagement, the weak legal sector has been instrumental in allowing, power holders or those conservatives and nationalist politicians or wealthy actors to confront their critics, to confront their dissenters in a way that violates human rights of the Papuan. So as we have seen, many activists, anti-racism activists are now on trial, are now in prison, and they were criminally pursued by law enforcement agencies keen to impress their political superiors or their corporate sponsors behind all this criminalization. So with this manipulations of legal agencies, by vested political interests and economic interests, any critical citizens and Papuans lack the protection they need to exercise their human rights without fear of severe punishment. And in fact, this punishment have increased in severity over the years. I think the Jokowi government has proposed to, to free all political prisoners. And he said that when he visited Papua in 2015. And he did release 5 political prisoners at the time. However, nothing he has done in releasing many other Papuans who have been taken into court, have been taken into jail for what they perceive to be rebellion or treason charges. So in short, in combinations of this oligarchic influence, economic influence, ideological immobility, rigidity, and the weak rule of law have kept Papuan under the danger of severe punishment. So I think it is important to come back to what Reverend Benny Jai mentioned, the research done by Indonesian Institute of Science. Number one is discrimination and marginalizations of Papua. And secondly is violence and impunity that persists in Papua. 2 years ago, Amnesty International has highlighted 69 cases of unlawful killing as well as extrajudicial killing against Papuans. Not a single of them have been, really solved in a way that people feel justice is being delivered. The government may claim that every human being in Indonesia, every Indonesian, every Papuan have the right to enjoy human rights without discrimination. And this is very important because this is one of the most fundamental principles in international human rights law, to which Amnesty has been working on for many years. However, in practice, what we have seen is grave violations of the rights that will decide the case of Bokhtar Tabuni, Irwanus Rokmabin, and others the day after tomorrow, in 17th of June. So we have about, very few days before the verdict for the rest of the what we call at Amnesty prisoners of conscience. It's more than just political prisoner. It's a very legitimate, it's a very peaceful expression based on their conscience. So I think the best way to do it now is to call on to urge Indonesian President Joko Widodo, who have promised in 2015 to release all political prisoners or prisoners of conscience without any condition. So to immediately, to unconditionally release them. And the reason behind it is very simple. I think there is a need for, the government has had experience where under Sukarno, Sukarno provided amnesty for rebellion armed movement at the time. Suharto even, in the case of Timor in 1977, had granted amnesty for many Timorese pro-independence activists in order to involve them in what Suharto called a development agenda. Although in years to come, he has imprisoned so many other Timorese, and as well as Papuan pro-independence activists, and also Aceh pro-independent activists. And the post-Suharto period, I think, started from Habibie, President Habibie. He had released so many political prisoners. President Wahid, who come after Habibie, had also issued a presidential decree releasing all political prisoners from Papua, Aceh to Timor. And even under Yudhoyono, I think despite of the first few years that he had imprisoned several Papuans and Moluccans, I think in the case of Aceh, he managed to grant amnesty for pro-independence of Aceh activists. So we have a legal basis for amnesty, and there is precedent for amnesty. And I think apart from urging or call on Indonesian authorities through presidents to release them, we also have to call on, you know, the government and the parliament to immediately drop the makar charges or the treason charges under the criminal codes against the peaceful political activists, including anti-resistance activists, and to ensure that all of them, the 7 Papuans who are in detention, plus in many other places, in Sorong, for example, they are not being tortured or they are not being otherwise ill-treated. And I think this has to be done in a more intense way this week in order to convince the court to release all the prisoners of conscience, all the political prisoners. So I ended up there. I hope that answered the question. If not, really sorry. I think the other speakers would be able to complement to what we have said. Thanks, Rosa. Give it back to you.